This is one of the most OP broken builds in Elden Ring history. You are definitely going to want to use this now in the way that I've set up in the build portion of this video, because it's so good, it genuinely might get patched, because using this makes the entire Shadow of the Erdtree DLC easy, which is a crazy statement, but it's actually true. And it's not even hard to get. Like, this is a build that anyone can put together, and it's going to stomp all over whatever you put in front of it. And I've also added chapter markers in the video so that you can jump to the sections that are most relevant to your interests. And speaking of which, these official Elden Ring figures are only available for a couple more days, but I've got an affiliate code which gives you a discount on them. So if you've been considering picking one of these up, just use code IGON and it'll give you a discount at checkout. Don't wait too long though, because they won't be on sale forever. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get the show on the road. Drop a like on the video to get started here, and we can begin. The build itself revolves around the Carrion thrusting shield, so I'm going to show you where to find that first. To get started on the quest to get the shield, you need to teleport to the Church District High Road. You can see it here on your map if you don't have that unlocked. Once you teleport in, go forwards and to the right, and you're going towards this archway set into the mountain, and you then need to go into that archway all the way up the stairs, and you'll find a Site of Grace. Then you're going to copy what I'm doing, jumping across the roofs here. So jump onto the roof, be wary of the enemies, you don't need to attack the enemies, and then use this little triangle point to hop onto the next roof, and then climb the bricks and jump across, and then jump onto the next roof there, and then finally jump onto this long structure which you can use to climb up to the top of this roof. Then jump through the hole in the ground onto this little walkway structure thingy, and then in front of you you'll see another hole in the ground which you can jump through, and you can then just run past all of these enemies and take the second entrance on the left, and that's going to lead to a walkway with a lift inside it which you can take to the top floor. That's the Specimen Storehouse. Then take an immediate left when you get there, run through, tag this Site of Grace, and then we're going to run forward in the Specimen Storehouse, past the ladder on the right hand side, and all the way through to the back of this room where you'll see a Fire Knight. Ignore the Fire Knight and instead just swivel around them, and you'll find the Carrion thrusting shield right behind. So now let's talk about why it's so good, and then we'll move on to how you can build it to be as bussin' as possible. So we've all seen shields before in these sorts of games, and yeah, they block damage and that's fine. But in Shadow of the Erdtree, we've got this new thrusting type. And so you get the best of both worlds. So you get all of the damage absorption and blocking that you'd normally expect from a shield, but it also does the same amount of damage as a great katana's normal hits when you thrust with it, which is crazy. The fact that you can be aggressive and defensive at the same time is double dipping in what would normally be two completely opposing playstyles. So when you're in the open world, for example, you're just not going to take damage. Like all that annoying chip damage from stuff, not going to happen, right? You're just going to melt everything that's in front of you. And it's crazy on bosses as well, as I alluded to at the start of the video. But before we go any further, I want to give you a quick little warning. I do intend to show some boss gameplay here, which won't just be the super early game bosses and the open world stuff. I'll prioritize those, but I do want to show you how gnarly this thing is on some other bosses too. And so if you're just here for the guide and you don't want any spoilers and you just want the build itself, I've got a timestamp in the description which will take you to the build part, and then that way you can stay spoiler free. Okay, with that warning out of the way, the thrusting shield deals pierce damage, which is unique because it gains a buff to counterattacks, which obviously happen when you hit an enemy during their attack animation. And when I start showing you some of the key elements of the build here in a moment, we're actually going to be bumping that counterattack damage up even more, so it just becomes even more gnarly. And the cool thing about it as well is that thrusting shields kind of just let you keep attacking over and over until you run out of stamina. And because of the way that we're putting the build together, we're not going to run out of stamina that fast, and also just inherently in the thrusting shield, it kind of has a trick to it, I guess, to prevent you from losing too much stamina, where basically it activates when block attacking. So you're really only using stamina to attack and not really to block. Now, maybe that's a bug, right? Maybe that gets fixed or detuned or something by FromSoft. We'll see. If it does, leave a comment down below. I'll also update the guide down below in the description with whatever the new most optimal method is for using this bad boy if it does get detuned. But for now, yeah, it's OP. Like, this thing's bonkers. And to be clear also, just to make sure we're all on the same page here, to do that, you've just got to hold your left bumper, that's L1 on PlayStation, and then while doing that, you just spam the right bumper, that's R1 on PlayStation. That's what allows you to do this continuous sort of thrust spam attack. But be careful, because I know very, very well at this point, having tried to record this video for so long and gotten a little carried away with myself, that it's very easy to kind of get in a little bit of a meditative trance where you're holding those bumpers down, you're spamming with that right bumper to just attack again and again and again, and you actually kind of forget to pay attention to your health bar. In the build itself, I'll talk about some ways to sort of mitigate this, just because if you can make your life easier and sort of have to remember one less thing, you might as well do it, right? So that'll be in the build too. Also, on the topic of making your life easier, I think that it's really worthwhile paying attention to what the thing that you're fighting is weak to. So if you know, like I'll put on screen right now, if you know a boss is weak to fire, for instance, you can make use of the fact that the shield does let you put greases on it. So you can add elemental damage, and then if you're going into a fight and it's the, I don't know, dancing lion fight, for example, and it's allergic to fire, it's time to put your fire grease on and go crazy, right? Like, even beyond just the sort of base elements of the build that we're going to put together here to make this thing OP, there's even more sauce that you can squeeze out of the lemon. So let's be specific. Let's give some examples of bosses this thing absolutely shreds. There are a few bosses I will say that it's not so good on. We'll talk about those in just a moment, but let's use the dancing lion as an example. As you can see, it's chunking it at about, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10% of its health bar per hit here, or per thrust, I suppose. And you'll get these moments where you kind of get a short window to get maybe 3 attacks off in a row, and it does so much damage. It's crazy, and you can stagger it with the thrusting shield as well. So that's the lion done with. Let's move on to Rolana. For this, I used frost grease, and also as I fight here, you might notice that I've got the barricade shield Ash of War on. We'll talk more about that in just a moment, but even just in the last couple of seconds of me saying that, you can see the boss is already on half health. Like, that's just nasty. And with this attack, I block that as well, and it does damage to the boss. Like, what is going on there? There's just no hope for a poor, lowly little boss like Queen Rolana here to do anything when my defensive shield is this prickly. It's just silly. It's actually just silly. I love it. Okay, let's move on to the next boss. It's Mesmer's turn. We're going to be using freezing grease once again here, and I'm pretty much just spamming attacks against him and holding the block the entire time. So for the slam attack, for the spin attack, for all those sorts of things, you're just going to massively reduce the damage that you're actually taking there. And this is an example of me using the barricade shield. So that kind of heavy prong attack there would otherwise kind of mess us up a little bit, but barricade shield comes in clutch. Once you get into the second phase of the fight here, you again are just going to keep on sort of edging your way forward, bonking with the shield and chipping damage from Mesmer. And you can stagger him pretty quickly as well. Like, it's not that bad. And that's going to allow you to do a little bit more bonking and continue to chip him down. He obviously takes a lot more hits than some of the other bosses that we showed here, but it's really not that bad. And you'll see in the clip here as well, I actually tried tanking all of his like crazy AoE damage here with Millennia's Great Rune, and it worked pretty well, I would say, until he went up in the air here, and then, well, yeah, Mesmer did Mesmer things, but still, you get the point. This thing's great against these sorts of bosses. Now, I mentioned there was an exception. The exception, kind of, it's still good, but it's just less good against dragons. So his Senesax, for example, it's just hard to target their legs, basically. You've got to be so close, and you're trying to do these successive attacks, and dragons are just wriggly lizards, right? So it can just be a little hard to kind of keep tracking on them. And because your camera's going crazy as well underneath their legs, you're not necessarily blocking from the front with the shield, and it's just, there's just room for it to go wrong. So let's move on to the specifics of the build itself, so you can copy what I'm using in my game. You guys can theory craft even better versions of the build in the comments down below. Like, we can crowdsource the most OP craziness here, but I'll start with the best I've been able to do, right? So as I mentioned, the Ash of War is Barricade Shield. Barricade Shield halves the stamina cost when blocking attacks, so you can see why it makes perfect sense to use that here. And I'd recommend setting it to heavy affinity when you apply the Ash, because we want to further the strength scaling, ideally. And like, this thing's going to hit really hard because we're using it as a two-handed weapon, but we want it to hit even harder, right? And if we scale into strength, it will benefit from that. Now, on top of that, also, it has 70 guard boost when infused with heavy and 94 physical damage reduction. So pretty strong stats there as well. For talismans, we have our 4 slots sort of allocated as follows. In the first slot, we're going to be putting Spear Talisman. That's going to increase thrusting weapon counterattack damage by 15%. This is a counterattack, again, so that we remember and we're on the same page, because it can be kind of easy to get mixed up with this wording. Counterattacks are when you attack an enemy during their attack animation. So that's slot 1. Slot 2 is going to have the two-handed sword talisman. which enhances attacks with two-handed weapons, just for it to slap that much harder. In slot 3, we've got the Great Shield Talisman, which reduces stamina damage taken while blocking by 20%. And that's why before, when I was mentioning that we're mainly going to be losing our stamina by attacking while we're holding block, this is contributing to the sort of success of that. And then the 4th talisman is the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman, which greatly raises stamina recovery speed, which overall is just a useful thing to have. Now, for your wondrous physic mix, we're going to have Deflecting Hard Tear, which temporarily enhances Spontaneous Guard. So to translate that into slightly more understandable language, it basically lets you block damage like a parry does in Sekiro. And if you do that multiple times in a row, you just kill the enemy. I mean, you don't literally kill it, but you do a whole load of damage or something like that. I'm kind of ass at getting those parries, admittedly, so I'm going to leave this one in your hands to experiment with, but I know that it's good. And the hard tear also lasts for 5 minutes, so that's plenty of time for you to get through an entire boss fight, so you don't need to worry about it expiring before the boss is dead. For our second slot, there are actually 2 options here, which I think you should sort of consider depending on what your playstyle is. The first option would be to use the Green Burst tear, and that's going to increase your stamina recovery speed. And so if the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman just wasn't doing enough for you, this is going to make it even faster. But if you feel like you're kind of okay for stamina, you're not too worried about that, you could do other tears instead, which are going to boost your elemental damage, for example, especially if you're using a bunch of greases on bosses that you know are weak to those. For armor, you can pretty much just use whatever you want, but you will want to be at a poise breakpoint of at least 51. That is going to be important. For me, I'm choosing here to use Rakshasa's set because it's good. That's it. That's all I got for that one. Okay, let's talk stats. First of all, to be able to actually use the shield, you're going to need 17 strength, 13 dex, and 15 int. And for speccing into stuff, you're going to want 60 points in vigor, dex to a minimum of 13. I've got 15 here just because my character just has a base of 15 dex. And then intelligence to 15. We also want to spec at least 60 points into strength, but if you have enough levels to spend, then you can go up to 80 in strength. And then I would recommend putting the rest into endurance because that's just going to help you out with your stamina. So as long as you got like 40 or something in endurance, you should be all good. So that's the build. And final reminder, these official Elden Ring figures are only on sale for a little longer. So use my discount affiliate code IGON to make it just that little bit cheaper. Links in the description down below. Thanks, folks. I'll see you next time.